Welcome to Frameworks. This is a place for coaches who want more than just reps and sets. We dig into principles, philosophies, and stories that help you coach with clarity, design with purpose, and to keep chasing mastery. Today, we're going to zoom in on something a lot of coaches think about, and my goal is to provide maybe a different perspective on, and that is the concept of energy systems training. If you've ever been confused by terms like aerobic, anaerobic, intervals, conditioning, or metabolic work, this episode is for you. We're going to simplify this down into what actually matters so that you can design training with intention instead of guesswork. So let's get into it. All right, so today we're going to talk about energy systems, and I'm going to take it from a little bit different of an approach. And I started teaching energy systems in this way a couple cohorts ago in the OPEX method, and I feel like this lens actually hits home for coaches a little bit better than just talking about things like zones and charts and only looking at energy systems curves and stuff like that. So what I'm going to do today is I'm going to talk about the concept of ATP. Okay, so we probably learned this when we were kids. Like, what is ATP? It's the energy currency of the body. So for us to do anything, for me to speak, for me to move my hands, for me to do bicep curls, back squats, power cleans, to row, anything like that, my body needs ATP. And it's always looking at where that ATP is coming from. And that is largely dependent on the activities that I'm doing and the effort in which I'm doing those activities. So when you understand that, so the language I'm going to use for this, for you guys that aren't familiar with OPEX, I'm going to use gain, sustain, and pain. Okay, so gain is the creatine phosphate system. We'll dig more into that. Sustain is the aerobic system, and pain is the anaerobic system. Okay, so once we understand how energy is produced and what our body is looking for to produce that energy and what dose response, i.e. exercise selection or exercise type or specifics in terms of energy systems training, whatever we're doing, it's going to have a different demand. So once we understand that demand and where our body's getting those things from, and we start to understand the relative dosages from person to person, it makes energy systems training really, really simple. So that's what we're going to talk about today. And at the end of the episode, I'm actually going to screen share, and we're actually going to design some gain, pain, and sustain training programs together. Okay, let's do a quick crash course on ATP. So ATP is adenosine triphosphate, and it's the only usable form of energy in the human body. So like I said, every contraction, every rep, every step, every breath is powered by ATP. When ATP breaks down into ADP and phosphate, energy is released. That energy is what allows work to happen. Okay, so when we start getting into the system specifically, we'll talk about how different work has different demands. But when you are doing a bench press, when you are fighting from rep 5 to rep 6, you're depleting that ATP. And if rep 6 is that 1 or that 6 rep maximum or that 6 rep maximum for the specific day, and you just can't get that 7th up, that is largely due to a lack of ATP production or stores in the body because you use those things up. Okay. So like I said, that energy is what allows all work to happen. But here's the problem. We store almost no ATP. We actually store enough ATP for maybe a few seconds of hard work at most. So the body has one constant job: regenerate, rebuild ATP fast enough to keep you moving so that you continue to do whatever it is that you're doing. And this is where relativity comes into play. What are your fitness levels? How experienced are you in the thing? How much energy does it cost for you to do that thing? And how long can you continue to do that thing without depleting the energy stores or the ATP stores? So when we start talking about energy systems training, let's just look at it from a different perspective, at least for the length of this episode, and look at energy systems as keeping ATP available. So the work that I'm doing, what does my body have to do to replenish regenerate more ATP. So our bodies have three general ways that it produces ATP, and we'll call these the energy systems that we're going to talk about today: gain, pain, and sustain. They are always working together, but one dominates based on a couple things. And I think that that's really important. So we're never just doing aerobic work, right? Like there's other systems. The two other systems are always at play. We're never just doing anaerobic work. The other two systems are always at play. So I think that that's really important to keep in mind. But one of those systems will always be dominant. And the considerations or the things that we have to think about are that system is dominant based on a couple things. Number one, how hard the work is and how long the work lasts. That's really important. Okay. Number two, intensity and duration decide the system that's going to work. And there's a physiological decision that's made by the body when our body is like, hey, I'm going to try to continue to produce ATP. It's either going to be able to do it or it's not going to be able to do it. And again, it's based on a lot of different factors, and we'll get into those when we get into the specifics around those gain, pain, and sustain energy systems. And finally, it's not your intent. It's not the workout name. It's none of that. It's not what, maybe your coach prescribes to you that's going to determine what system is dominant. Again, refer to 1 and 2. How hard is the work? How long is the work? What is the intensity of the work and duration of the work? Okay. So those considerations are really, really important to think about. And that's why individualization becomes really, really important, because, the way that I handle, 500 meter row intervals at, a minute and 45 seconds per 500 meters is going to be probably different than the way that you handle it. Okay. And then we can use a bunch of different examples, with work, whether it's resistance training, anaerobic or aerobic training. So we have to understand all three systems are always working together. They're synergizing, but one system is always dominant. All right, let's talk about gain. So gain is resistance training. Okay. So, this is the fastest way to regenerate ATP. Okay. So, the body is using creatine phosphate stored in the muscle to instantly resupply or regenerate ATP. And this is where the whole concept, from like a performance standpoint, this is where the whole concept of creatine monohydrate became extremely popularized, right? Because if we top off those creatine phosphate stores via creatine monohydrate, those stores will be available for us when we're doing tough work, when we're hitting tough contractions, when we have to sprint really fast for, 5, 6, 7 seconds or whatever the case is. Okay. So something that's really important when we start thinking about this system is that it's immediate, it's powerful, but it's also short-lived. Okay. So it's dominant in short explosive efforts. So these are like, maximum lifts, even sometimes in extended lifts. So we're talking about like 1 rep maxes, 3 rep maxes, 5 rep maxes, or just a set of 10. Again, using the bench press as an example, you are depleting ATP really quickly when you do these types of movements. Okay. But you're also depleting ATP very quickly when you're doing explosive movements like, jumps, sprints, anything to do with like quick accelerations. Like I need to, immediately produce energy or produce power at a really, really high level. We are depleting ATP in these scenarios. So this system produces almost no fatigue byproducts, but it depletes almost immediately. Once creatine phosphate is gone, power drops. And you can kind of, just imagine, a couple of scenarios. Okay. So just imagine, you hitting a tough 8 in the back squat, and every single rep, you feel it just getting harder and harder and harder and harder. And reps number 6, 7, and 8 on like an RPE scale, are going to be much higher than reps 1 through 5. I know that seems really obvious, but at those very moments in those repetitions, we are depleting those ATP stores that we have in the system. Okay. So yes, there can be some like localized muscular fatigue and things like that. But I think I use the set of 8 very specifically because it's really not enough for like muscular burnout for a lot of people. If we're talking about, more strength endurance work, like, 15s, 20s, and 30s, I think that's a little bit different. But when we look at like, the 1s to 8 range, sometimes even 10, I think those are really good examples of ATP being being deplenished. And this is why, as a coach, when we prescribe true power work, we have to make sure that we always ask for intention to be there. Okay. So depending on what that work is, usually it's full intention. So think about, when we prescribe tempo and we say like, hey, I want you to go, at a 20x1 tempo. That X is explosive intent. No matter what the goal is, maybe outside of like working on some motor control stuff with someone and you want to control that concentric, we want to train that person to be fast through that concentric movement. And when we do that, that's power generation. So we're depleting ATP at a high level. Okay. So that's like intraset. Okay. So, full intent intraset. And then we also want to have full rest. Okay. So we're not training fatigue here when we start talking about training this system specifically. We want full rest so that we're recovered so we can go back with, what did I say in step 1 or consideration 1? Full intent. Okay, so let me give you an example using squats again. Okay, so imagine if you gave one of your clients, hey, I want you to do, in every minute on the minute, I want you to do 8 tough reps at, let's give a percentage. I want you to do 8 reps at 75% of your 1 rep max. Yeah, it seems insane, right? It's like someone might be able to get through that depending on how powerful they are. Absolutely. But you'll start to see like sets 2, 3, 4, 5, like you'll see power just start to do that because they can't approach it with full intent relative to that first set because they're missing rest. They're missing that recovery. So in that scenario, you're not actually getting stronger. You might just be improving one's ability to move quote unquote heavier load under fatigue, or B, there's probably some really good strength endurance adaptation that's occurring there. Okay, so we want full intent, we want full rest, and we want clean execution. So clean execution, we just want people to move well. Okay, especially when we're thinking about the full intent piece. If we're not moving well, we can't safely give our full intention. And this goes outside of just lifting weights as well, right? Like if we want someone to get faster in sprinting, we want intent to be there, and we need full rest to be there, or they're just training themselves to be slower and slower and so slower after they get from, set 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. Okay. To wrap that up. So when we're thinking about gain, it equals power, but power is very tough to sustain. So we need to rest. We need to recover so that we can repeat that power. All right. Next, let's talk about sustain or the aerobic system. The first few words that come to mind when I think about the aerobic system are like sustainability. I know it's in our term, but sustainability, your ability to sustain something over a long period of time, and longevity. Okay, so and we'll talk about why those words really come into play when I think about this system, but this system is just so important. Okay. It's very synergistic, and we'll talk about that here in a second. But when we start looking at characteristics of this system, it's the slowest system, if that makes sense. It's the least powerful system. Okay. But it is the most synergistic, like I mentioned. Okay. So it uses oxygen to regenerate ATP from, fuel substrates. Okay. So, carbohydrates, fats, and even sometimes protein, especially with the absence of carbohydrate in the system. Okay, so it produces a massive amount of ATP with minimal fatigue byproducts if we approach it appropriately. And this is the biggest difference between the aerobic or sustain system and the anaerobic or the pain system. It's the fatigue byproducts that are in the system during work and even sometimes after work. Okay, so when we're doing pain or anaerobic work, we're producing a lot of fatigue byproducts, and we'll talk about that when we get into pain. But sustain is different. Okay, we are going to produce fatigue byproducts, of course, right? Especially when we start thinking about the type of aerobic work that we can do. So an example I like to give is, two examples I like to give. Number one, just imagine someone rowing, okay, and trying to make rowing aerobic. And let's just say like this is like an intermediate client that you have, okay, and they don't have like millions and millions of meters logged on the rower. There's going to be some fatigue byproducts just based on the contraction rate in which they are pulling through the rower, trying to keep their torso upright. Maybe there's some grip considerations holding onto the oar and things like that. So there's going to be more fatigue byproduct in exercise selection depending on what that exercise selection is for that person. We could say the same thing with someone that is not used to a lot of localized quad muscular fatigue, and we get them on like a biker or get a higher damper. Okay, there's going to be a lot of fatigue byproduct just because of the muscular contraction considerations. And then all the way on the other side of the spectrum, or further up that side of the spectrum, is like when we start thinking about like mixed modal work, when we start having people do like burpees and kettlebell swings and dumbbell push presses and box jump step downs, and then getting on the bike or the rower and then kind of doing that in a circuit format. That work is really fun, but it's challenging for most people to actually make all of those contractions aerobic within that time domain. Okay, a lot of things going on, like change in elevation, heart rate shifts, blood pressure shifts, going up and down, bearing down, holding onto a kettlebell to swing it to make sure that that back stays nice and braced, things like that, right? So all of those things are going to have a negative influence on our ability to continue to make that work sustainable. And that's why a lot of people love that work, because there's that challenge to make all of those contractions sustainable. When we start thinking about sustain and the dominant characteristics of sustain, we can start thinking about things like long duration work, low to moderate intensity work, recovery between hard efforts, and just daily movement, going out, walking upstairs, hiking, biking, cycling outside. All of those things tap into this system. But let's not forget that we can also do really tough sustain work. Okay. I'm a huge believer they have to earn the right to do that tough sustain work. But, in the OPEX method, we talk about the MAP continuum, maximum aerobic power. And when we look at it from a progressive standpoint, we start at like 30-minute intervals. And over a long period of time, we work our way down to 30-second intervals. So those 30-second intervals compared to those 30-minute intervals are going to be much tougher, much higher turnover. But the thing is that we're still going to be able to sustain whatever pace we're going at for those 30-second intervals, and rest time being about 1-to-1 as compared to work time. And we can quickly rest, recover, hit it again. And we could do like 30 seconds on, 30 seconds off times 20 reps. And we can make that absolutely sustainable and repeatable across all 20 of those reps. That changes. And I know I keep talking about anaerobic work. I'll get to that in a second. But I think it's always good to, kind of wrestle with the differences between aerobic and anaerobic whenever talking about one or the other, because we could very easily get confused. A question that I'm always asked is, well, if we can do 30 seconds of aerobic work and we can do 30 seconds of anaerobic work, what's the difference between the two? And the difference between the two are the effort within that 30-second time box. And how do you gauge if you're going too hard or not hard enough? You always have to consider the rest. So whenever we teach the MAP continuum or the pain continuum, we always connect it to work-rest ratios. So for example, the 30 seconds on, 30 seconds off, that's 1-to-1 work-rest. If we were doing 30 seconds on in an anaerobic or a pain scenario, we're resting for 3+ minutes, right? There's a big difference there. So if you see 30 seconds on, 30 seconds off versus 30 seconds on, 3 minutes off, intuitively, we should know the effort that we should hit those at. Because if you hit the 30 seconds on, 3 minutes off at the 30-30 effort, you're going to get a minute in and be like, what am I doing? I could have done this, 20, 30 seconds ago. Okay. So work rest ratios really matter. Key insight here is sustain doesn't just support endurance and performance only. It supports everything. Okay. Inside of performance, inside of, other characteristics when we start talking about the gain system and the pain system. And the way I always like to talk about, the benefits and the synergizing factors with sustain is that it's actually going to help you recover from those tough sets. It's going to help you recover from those tough sprints. It's going to help you recover from session to session, from rep to rep. So we can go too far with it where it can start to decrease our ability to get strong and recover and those other things. But if we dose it properly, it can actually have some really positive synergistic effects with the other systems. All right, now let's dig dig into anaerobics, or what we call OPEX pain. Okay. So, I would call, I'm thinking of like characteristics, 'cause I talked about like what words come to mind, when I think about these systems. When I think about pain, I think about, capacity with a cost. Okay. Intensity is really high, and there's some negative outcomes from hitting work with such high intensity, especially if our training ages and our ability to produce power, increase. If you take an absolute beginner and you're like, hey, I want you to do anaerobic work, a lot of them guys, they just can't, they don't have enough power. Their light bulb doesn't, turn on bright enough to be able to produce the amount of power to need all of the rest and to have something to recover from. But once you get someone that's like strong relatively, right? And, they have some good experience, in lifting weights, and they have some experience in like utilizing, this pain system, it becomes really, really tough to recover from it. Okay. So when intensity stays high and time extends past a few seconds, the body shifts. Okay. Some interesting things start to happen. Now, ATP is generated through a different process, and this process is called glycolysis. Okay, so this system uses carbohydrates mainly, and works without oxygen and produces ATP fairly quickly, but depending on the amount of stores that are depleted within a particular bout, that's going to largely determine how quote unquote quickly the ATP is reproduced. But it's really inefficient. Okay. The byproducts that are produced when we're doing this work, they increase acidity. They increase, the burn, the fatigue, the discomfort. A lot of people talk about, and I've experienced this many, many times, like the copper feeling in the mouth, right? Like when we start to feel that, when we start to taste that, when we feel like we have to lay down and like put our legs up and just like recover for 20 minutes, it's like we've dug deep into this system. Okay. And this system dominates, hard efforts lasting, let's call it, for some people that are really powerful, 10 plus seconds. Okay. We're not going 30 minutes though. And, this system is dominant. There's going to be a time where this system depletes, and then we go into the aerobic system where we're just like holding on. Okay. So for a lot of people, it's like 10 seconds to 90 seconds. Once they get past that 90-second mark, they're just hanging on for dear life and trying to, hold the power that they held from that 10 to 90-second window. So when we start to think about, what kind of work is this, I explained it in the last section in sustain. It's like the 30 second on, bike as hard as you possibly can, or not as hard as you possibly can. Let me take that back. Bike at 95 to 97%. So you're not testing, and then you're resting for, let's call it 3 minutes. Okay. And you're doing that for, let's call it 5 sets. And then maybe you'll rest for 10 minutes, and then you'll do that for a couple blocks. Okay, so that's an example of a pain progression, or a pain prescription, not progression. Okay, something like a 400-meter sprint. Okay, hard row intervals. There's a lot of things that can fit inside of here. A lot of people, or some people I should say, could even do like mixed work and make it, or tap into this system. We have to be really careful though, and I'll get into that when we talk about program design. We have to be really careful in what we're, asking people to do with this system when we're talking about the type of work that they're doing. And what I mean by that is this system is all about the metabolic effect. Okay. There's not a lot of like progressions that are even worth our time to think about in this system outside of just like, I produced this metabolic effect for this amount of time, and then this amount of time, and then this amount of time. So what I mean by that is progression here is that we push time to the right. It actually doesn't matter what we're doing though. Okay. So we could bike one week and row one week, and, we can sprint the next week. I like to keep exercise selection static, just so like we have that, context from the previous week or the previous couple weeks in terms of like power output, that we can really think about, hey, I want to try to hold that, or even that's going to go down a little bit. Okay. So it's the only progressive manner that we're okay with power decreasing as time increases. Okay. So, to put that into simple terms, it's like you can produce a lot more power at 10 seconds than you can at 2 minutes. Okay. But it's still a heavy metabolic dose, but the power that's produced is relative to how long you can hold it. Okay. So, hard intervals, let's just call it. Okay. We're doing hard intervals. Mostly they're going to be, cyclical or maybe even mixed cyclical, where we're jumping from one implement to another. Very rarely will we use mixed work in pain. So like we're not doing a bunch of kettlebell swings and, pull-ups and burpees and stuff like that. And the reason being is because the turnover isn't as high. Okay. So just imagine doing at hard effort, 10 burpees, 20 kettlebell swings, 30 box jump step downs, right? It's like, the burpees and kettlebell swings, like you can have a decent turnover, but you can only swing a kettlebell so fast. And then when you get to the box jump step downs, your turnover slows down quite drastically, right? So you're not really tapping into that system. You're going to be limited by your ability to turn over that movement in that rep. Now, position that against like, hey, I want you to get on the assault bike and I want you to go for 1 minute. You are not going to be limited on how fast that assault bike can turn over. Okay. The limitation is going to be your capability to turn over that assault bike. Okay. So let's just keep in mind that, pain allows intensity to continue. It's a metabolic, effect, but it comes, with a cost, a hormonal cost, the ability to recover from it. And for a lot of people, like an emotional cost, like a lot of people have to like really motivate themselves to be able to do this work. And for most people, general population individuals, sadly, there's not enough motivation just to like move on a daily basis. So why would we ask them, hey, I want you to like work harder than you've ever worked, and I want to do that consistently in your training? Motivation, you might start to see that wane. They might take that left instead of that right to go to the gym because they know what they're in for. Okay. So, there are some benefits in this system, but it's definitely not a system to live in. And it's definitely not a system that everyone needs. We can get a lot of the great benefits that we would get, metabolic benefits that we would get in this system by progressing ourselves down to tough aerobic work. Okay. So takeaways from those systems, the gain, pain, sustain, all three systems are always active. Okay. One is just more dominant depending on what you're doing. The question is not which system is on, it's which system is dominant when we start to prescribe work. We have to prescribe work and we have to understand what we're prescribing against. And it's not just the work that we're prescribing, it's the explanation of the work and the effort that we want our clients to approach this work with. Okay. We also have to remember that gain develops power and force, sustain builds capacity, recovery, and leads to longevity, better life, right? Better quality of life. And pain is a stressor, a metabolic stressor. A lot of programs overuse pain, not because it's effective long-term, but because it feels like work. And they want their people, whoever's doing their program, to feel like they got a good workout in. I think we need to reframe that a bit, because you can get some really good workouts, in from like a dose, standpoint in resistance training, and you definitely can get that in sustainable work as well. All right. Now we're actually going to apply these principles together. So if you're watching this in LearnRx, just stick around right here, because next we're going to dig into the application of all three of these energy systems and actual program design using CoachRx. If you're not watching this in LearnRx, please follow the link in the description. If you're not already a subscriber, use the code frameworks, and we're going to give you 25% off your annual prescription, where we have thousands of hours of fitness education for you to continue to master your craft as a professional coach. And you can follow along with us as we go deeper into gain, pain, and sustain.